All right, good morning everybody, or good afternoon, or even good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. Welcome to our Wakanda webinar series. Today's webinar is about deploying a Wakanda application to the cloud on Windows Azure. My name is Michel Guerin, and I'll be the host for today's webinar. So on the agenda today, we'll start with a quick 5-minute introduction. Here you go. We change the slide. We start with a quick 5-minute introduction. Then we'll go over the steps that are required to deploy your application to the cloud, and that will take about 20 minutes. And we'll wrap up the session with some pointers to additional references. Then we'll have our Q&A session. Expect about 15 minutes for that Q&A session. To enter your questions, you will have to type them in the chat room, same as what you see on the picture here, and that chat room is provided by WebEx. So feel free to add your comments, your questions during the presentation. However, we will only answer them at the end of the presentation. Next slide. Okay. So why the cloud? Before we start, so here's some interesting information from Gartner. The cloud, mobility, and open source will drive application development market to exceed $9 billion in 2012. Some other interesting information. The cost is the major driver for people to go to the cloud, but it's also agility, flexibility, and speed to deploy new applications. Another interesting piece of information was that 90% of large mainstream enterprises and government agencies will use some aspects of cloud computing by 2015. So that's all interesting cloud information and the reason why we're talking about the cloud today. Now, Windows Azure. So just so that everybody knows here, Windows Azure is a cloud platform. It's actually both a platform as a service, also called PaaS, and an infrastructure as a service, also referred as IaaS. It is classified as the public cloud. Right now there's conversation about public cloud and private cloud. So Windows Azure would be the public cloud. And it can run both Windows servers and Linux virtual machines. Our speaker today is Jürgen Fesslmeier. Jürgen has over 10 years web development experience and is our Wakanda product manager. So without further ado, let me introduce you to our speaker of the day. Hello, Jürgen.
Hi there. Thanks, Michel. So as Michel has already mentioned, we want to run you through deploying your Wakanda application to the cloud, and we're going to do this in this initial step. We're going to do this using Windows Azure from Microsoft, and we will, in a second session, do another deployment webinar using Amazon EC2, using Ubuntu server, and we'll also walk you through how to set up SSL security, remote debugging, which is a great feature in Wakanda, and we'll show you how to do reverse proxying and some load balancing. But that's going to be in the next seminar in 2 weeks. Today we're going to have we'll start with setting up a Windows 2008 server. We will install Wakanda on it. We'll run you through how to configure the firewall and so forth. And then we will install an existing Wakanda app to that server. So let's get started. Here you see my browser. Windows Azure comes in a free trial, as you see here on the top right. You can go to windowsazure.com and click on free trial and sign up for this 90-day trial. all you need is actually, you do need a credit card. It needs to be valid, but it will not be charged, obviously, for 90 days. And you will need a phone or mobile phone for the sign-up process. So just go through and get your 90-day free trial. So, but since I've done this before the webinar, let me just go ahead and sign in into my portal. And there's one more step in using what is called a virtual machine, because we are running a server in the cloud, so we want to run virtual machines, and you will need to sign up for this preview feature ahead of time. So after you signed in, just go to this page, account windowsazure.com, preview features, and here the second item is virtual machines and virtual networks. I'm already signed up, but just go through the sign-up process. It's instantaneously, so your feature will be available right away. So I have enabled that already, and when you go into your portal or into your management portal here, that's on manage.windowsazure.com, you will see that the virtual machines have been set up. Maybe it just take a while.
It takes a little while.
Maybe while this loads. A lot of people have also asked about pricing. So what does this cost? What does Azure cost after the free trial? And so there's various packages you can go through to the pricing page and just go to calculator. So what we're going to set up today is a medium server and just one of them. So that would be a cost of $115. Just check this page out. It's actually the same price for all different operating systems here, Ubuntu, Windows, and CentOS, and so forth. So there's different prices here on storage, obviously. Just check it out. Let's go back to the management console. Here you see here on the left side in this management console, you see like all the services that I have subscribed to. As I said, virtual machines is another trial feature that I have signed up for. You can add as many virtual servers as you wish in this 90-day trial period. I have configured a bunch already, but I wanted to show you how to create a new one. So let's go ahead and click on New down here. Go to Virtual Machine, pick from the gallery, and we can just pick a standard Windows server. We can also pick, SUSE Linux or Ubuntu. So there's various here in the gallery, but we're going to pick this Windows 2008 Service Pack 1 July 2nd. I hit Next here. We will need to give it a name, so let's just say call it Win8 Web 2. And the administer password is always the same. Obviously, give it a password. Repeat the password. And as I said, for the demo today, we're going to choose a medium 2-core 3.5 gigabyte memory server. You can also switch to other or create other server instances here with larger and smaller. We recommend at this point this medium server. Today, our Wakanda requires a 2-core CPU on Windows. We'll have other configurations available later on in an updated version of Wakanda Server. So just hit Next. We choose Standalone Virtual Machine. And DNS name is basically your public URL where you're going to access the server and of course then later also your application. So choose wisely. For this purposes, we're just going to choose Web 2. So the Wakanda application will be available on this server on wacweb2.cloudapp.net. Storage account, just leave this as it is. You can actually attach other hard drives or mount other storages, so you can share storage amongst your virtual machines. That's very useful at times. And then you also want to choose where geographically your virtual machine is hosted. So I'm going to choose West Coast because we are on the West Coast right now, so that's the least latency time you're going to see accessing your server. But there's various other options in Western Europe, North Europe, and so forth. So just pick any of those and it will be hosted in the data center in that geographic location. So when you hit next, there's other VM options. We're going to omit those right now and just go ahead and start provisioning this. So provisioning means like it's being set up in a data center at Microsoft. And there's this will take about from 2 to 15 minutes depending on the time of day and so forth. So I actually went ahead already before the webinar and created another virtual machine, WinWeb 1. And what you want to do next is actually you want to go into the details page of your, as I just showed you. You see an overview of the load of the server. There's no load right now, and you see like the configuration, how many cores. You see various here on the right sidebar. On the quick glance, you see all the details like host names or public IP address under which you will be able to access the server and so forth. So interesting for us is a public virtual IP address and also the DNS later on. And now we need to configure endpoints. So endpoints is basically ports and the protocol under which that can, you can access through to the firewall in for this virtual machine. You can add another endpoint I've already created. There's one called a remote desktop. That's what we're going to use to use our remote desktop client. And I have already created a few, but let's create one more. Just say add endpoint, and at that point it's not load balanced, so we could create an HTTPS endpoint. It's a TCP port 443 and 443, and as soon as you do that, another endpoint will create it, so you will be able to access your service through that port with a protocol TCP. So this is very important, otherwise we'll have problems later on. Here another piece of information is here on the first line. You see I have configured HTTP port 80. That's the public port, and it will route to a private port called 8081, and that's going to be the port where the web application, the Wakanda application, will be running at. So that really depends on how you configure the application. The application that I'm about to install is just configured to run on that port. So just be aware of that. You don't have to do that at all, but I want my users that access my application not to be able to enter the port after the URL. That becomes more clearly when we are at that point. So at that point, all the endpoints are configured. Let's see if the instance is running. When you go back to the details page here, Web 1 and 2, they are running. It says running, but it's updating. and another one that's provisioning. So let's pick the first one here and say connect. So at that point, what was happening is it downloaded a configuration file to access the server on remote desktop client. So it's here in my download area. I just double click, and you need to have a remote desktop client available on your machine. So just go ahead in the field here. You want to use username and use the Wakanda password. Just go ahead and say connect and confirm that. As soon as you connect, you will actually see the desktop of your server. Should come up shortly. This is a new instance, so this may take a couple of seconds before the administration user is created and desktop is loaded. There you go. So the first step was to create that virtual instance, and as you can see, it is up and running. Now we want to actually install Wakanda onto it, right? So before we do further configurations, let's get Wakanda onto the server here. So launch Internet Explorer is pre-installed here. Just go ahead and download Wakanda Server from our webpage, wakanda.org. Make this a little bit bigger. With some security restrictions by default, just add a web page here, and should be able to load this. So go to downloads, and then go into the production section. Let's choose the Windows. The server that we are going to install is the Wakanda for Windows Server 64-bit. You will see you don't need the studio on the server. You don't need it all in one package. Just click on server here, or I'll try to open. Just click open, and it will download a zip file. So you can here it indicates in Internet Explorer that the file is being downloaded, and that takes a couple of seconds before it's showing up. There you go. So it opens up the archive here separately. Let's just move those files, the Wakanda Server bundle, in onto the desktop. Let's copy it over. Actually the attached storage on Windows Azure is very fast compared to other virtual hosters. Let's say on Amazon EC2, this is quite much slower here, this process, I have noticed. By the way, all of those steps that I'm explaining here are also going to be available in a deployment guide. So we're going to give you a link later on after the webinar. Share that link so you can reproduce all of those steps for your own deployment. So Wakanda Server is now here on this server box. What you see here is the executable. And so before we launch the server, we now want to actually do one very essential step. We want to add this application to the firewall. So go into your server manager, say configure Windows Firewall here, and you want to allow a program or feature through Windows Firewall. You want to click on that, and it's not in the list, so add that program to that list. Let's do browse to that executable, and go to Wakanda Server here. Hit open and add. And OK. And let's go back in for a sec. Wakanda Server is now added, as you see here, this line, and it should be publicly available, right? So that said, the service is installed but not running. So let's just try and run the server. Let's double click, confirm the security warning, and see what happens here. So what happens is, this is welcome to Wakanda Server, publishing solution, default solution, and project server admin, that's our server admin that we're going to see in a second, is published on IP address on port 8080, right? So we want to make sure, again, that this port 8080 is actually configured. We don't need this window. So this endpoint port 8080 is here. So let's just try and access and go ahead and see if we can access our server that is running now. So for that, I'll just copy and paste the public IP into a browser window and use port 8080 here. And boom, it's loading up. So that's the server admin that you see here. It looks pretty empty. There's no applications loaded into the application server. And that is really, the next step. There's no solutions available, but that basically passes the test that we can now, because we are, I hope you have realized that we're on my local machine here, on my local browser, and the local browser can now access that virtual server instance that we have created just a moment ago, right? So that's actually a really big step. Let's go back into our server window here and go ahead and actually install an application, right? So there's this great application available. I want to install. That's called PTO from David Robbins. PTO is is available from GitHub under David Robbins. Go there. That's loading the repositories. Let's add GitHub also to the list of sites that we want to use. And pick the PTO repository here. So that's available under GitHub.com, David Robbins PTO. And what you can see all the sources, and you can just actually go ahead and, if you had Git installed on your machine, you could just clone it. But in this case, we'll just download a zip file. So click on the zip button here, select Open, and the sources are actually downloaded. But before that, we want to actually create a good location for our apps on the server. So say new folder. All of our apps will live on C and under directory apps. Let's just drag and drop that over here. Copy the files from the archive, and that's so the name of the folder is a little bit long here. was generated. So let's just call this PTO. There you go. So our solution is right in here, and now the source is there, the application is there, and now we just need to tell the application server that we want to use that solution, right? Let's go back into our management console. There's two ways basically you can do this. You can use that admin console, which is what I'm going to do right now. You can also do it right from the command line, and as a command line option, you can pass in the location of your solution. So this is going to live under apps, PTO, and then the solution name. So you have to pretty hard to remember one. PTO B201, I think it was. And see what happens when we click launch here. So it's launching, and on the server side, if you go back to the console window here, you should actually see another message, and that's what's happening. So, another solution was closed, the default one was closed, and another solution is opening. See, the PTO B201 is actually opened and is published on port 8081. So remember, back when we configured the endpoints, we defined port 8081 here as our private port and will be accessible through port 80. So port 80 appears, is the default port for any web HTTP server. So we don't need to define the port, and let's just access the application or the server right here through the IP address. We can also just do the same thing. And you can also use that URL, the DNS name. Let's do that here. And the WAC Web 1, remember .cloudapp.net. That's our official URL. You can also buy your own domain and configure correctly. So the admin comes up. Let's just play around. Log in as admin. See, this is the admin console of the application. Sign back out. Go to the calendar as a feature that Dave just added, and you'll see that the app is up and running. It's deployed to the server. As I said, you want to maybe buy a domain for your app. You can easily configure that, and that's the scope of the presentation today, the live presentation. In the next webinar, as I announced, we'll go a little bit further. We know the basics already, so we'll go ahead and create an Ubuntu instance. We're going to install an SSL certificate and assign it to our application. And we will talk a little bit about remote debugging in our next session, and we'll also do a little bit, show you a little bit about how to do load balancing. So thank you very much. I'll pass it back now to Michel.
Thank you, Jürgen, for showing us the steps to deploy Wakanda app on Windows Azure. Timing is great. You did it really fast, so that's pretty good. There was some questions regarding the URLs. So all the URLs that Jürgen talked about today, we'll include that in an email that we'll send to everybody as a follow-up email, so you'll have all the references there. In terms of references also, we'll provide there the Wakanda Cloud Deployment Guide that Jürgen talked about earlier. So we'll have a link in that email also for you to retrieve that guide. A few other things I want to let people know is that we have 2 events coming up. So if you want to learn more about Wakanda and meet people, experts on Wakanda, those are the right dates and events to really look at. One is going to happen here in beautiful Silicon Valley on October 26th and 27th in San Jose. And the sister event is going to be in Paris, lovely Paris, France, on November 16 and 17. So check out the jseverywhere.org website and register early to make sure that you have a seat to come and see us there. Other references before we go on the Q&A. For more information on Wakanda, of course, visit the wakanda.org website. This is the one piece that we really keep up to date all the time. I invite you also to join the conversation on our forums. If you have questions and or feedback you'd like to give us, this is the best place to do so. A lot of people are there. We have over 1,000 people, active users on the forum, so that's pretty good community there to help you. The Learning Center also, make sure you check it out. There's a lot of interesting information, source code, videos, all there, and the documentation itself, all within that Learning Center, so you can access it very easily. And of course, if you're using Twitter and Facebook, make sure to check us out and follow us on Twitter or like us on Facebook. And that's it for the presentation today. If you have questions, please send them in our Q&A little box here on WebEx. We'll take a minute here to review them, and we'll get back on within a minute. So shoot those questions. Okay.
Okay, we're back on. There's already a couple of questions, really good ones. Thanks for sending them. So one of the first question was, when will WebSockets be available? So WebSockets generally is a way to basically synchronize, different user interfaces, so you can, what I type on my web browser, someone else may see on another web browser. So that is already on our roadmap. So we don't usually give definitive dates for the future for releases when it's going to be, but it's definitely been on our roadmap already for a while. So expect something down the road on that. So another excellent question was, how do you publish your application on HTTPS port? So that's going to be covered in the next webinar, but generally you would, there's different ways. One way is what I showed today, is like Wakanda is actually the web server. You install your SSL certificate right into the application. I'm going to show that next time how that works. Lots of questions in the forums about that. And then you would just forward to that port, 443 to the SSL port on the server. Another way is to basically put another web server in front of Wakanda, or a whole battery of Wakanda servers, for instance, and say that IIS server, for example, a Windows web server, would be taking that request, the SSL request, the SSL security is installed on IIS, and it just routes to, internally proxies to the Wakanda server. So those are two ways. I'm going to show at least one way in our next webinar. And then there's another question: can the Wakanda server run as a service? What happens when you need to restart the VM. Yeah, that's a very good point. That's already today, no, and that's a big request to run it both on Windows as a service and on Linux, for example, as a daemon. So we're working on that.
Yeah, the last question I can see is somebody is asking if the session was recorded. So yes, it's recorded, and we'll send the link to that video.
Yeah, I hope you the resolution was not too high. You could see follow my screen and so forth, and this is another question here from Greg. When will you map your data to Microsoft Server 2008? I'm not sure if I understand the question correctly. So maybe you can.
SQL Server?
Yeah, SQL Server. Microsoft SQL Server.
All right, make Microsoft SQL Server. Okay, that's actually a very easy question. So yes, that's. We saw many feature requests in that regards. When do we talk to basically a SQL Server instead of like just Wakanda Server? And so there are different angles to that. And but today we have actually an extension available that you can talk to a MySQL server. And similarly, down the road on our roadmap, we also plan to include other SQL servers there. So we'll be able to talk to SQL, Microsoft SQL. Oracle, and so forth. So,
okay, I do not see any more questions. Let me see here.
Okay, so there's one more question from Tim. Can you provide a basic cost of deploying a Wakanda solution on Azure with the setup shown today? 2-core machine, how much is it per month or per year? So actually I showed that briefly. You just go to the Windows Azure webpage under prices, and the setup that I showed today was $115 a month. And there's a lot, the cheaper options with Wakanda also, like for example, on Ubuntu, you can install Wakanda Server on Ubuntu, and I believe you can even use a very small one for the very small instance with 1 core and half a gig of memory for I think $15 a month. So that's very cheap.
All right, let me see if I have any other questions. What is a recommended server? Is Ubuntu more stable than Microsoft?
Well, I would say depends really on your infrastructure, what you have already been using. My preference is Ubuntu server, Linux server. The Windows server just works equally well. They're both stable, up for prime time deployment. So just use either of those for your Wakanda deployments.
Okay, another question, is it possible to run multiple solutions from one Wakanda server?
Yeah, that's a great question. Today, actually, it is not. You may want to run multiple servers, each running a solution. That's a feature that has been requested a long time ago. You should see that in our next release, having multiple solutions run on the same server.
Okay. And another question from Greg. Do smaller instances work with Linux?
Yes, they do. I have tested that. I know I will share that in the 2 weeks webinar. You can also play around with that in the deployment guide that we'll give you access to in a moment. So you can there's already instructions for setting up Wakanda on Ubuntu. So yeah, that's done. There's another question here.
Well, is it as a single core, or it's a Windows only restriction, right?
Well, it appears that it is a Windows restriction only today. the dual core because I was able to run a single core on Linux. So we'll have to test that again, but it appears that it's a restriction. And unfortunately, there is no error message on Windows. So if you launch Wakanda Server on a single core Windows machine, the server starts up, but it never launches your application. So we improved that error messaging there at that point. But yeah, you have to have a dual core to make it run properly on Windows. On Linux, it's a different story.
Is Wakanda identical on Windows, Linux, in terms of features, performance, security, stability? Are there any differences?
Right. That's a great question. They are not identical as, I mean, of course, it's the same code base, but I mean, the way Linux handles, sockets, from sockets to, which web server are you using, or which, underlying libraries we're using on Linux, the performance will differ. We are actually looking into doing a performance comparison between the two platforms, and as soon as we have some results, we'll share them, of course, with the community. So you will see some reports there, so where we see what's faster on either platform. That's a good question, though. So another question from Grace: is it possible to hire a commercial developer with Wakanda? Yeah, I saw there were some postings on LinkedIn, for example. People were looking for commercial developers there.
Right, you can always check our forum and post a message there. So yeah, this is the best place maybe where you can find a developer. All right, I don't see any more questions, so I think that would be it for today. I want to thank everybody for joining us, and remember that we have another webinar next week, which is about data modeling, the second from Dave Terry. We're looking forward to see you all next week. Thanks again for joining us. Have a great day. Bye-bye.